This is a response to an AskProfWolff question sent in by a member of our Patreon community, Brian Pitsy. Brian asks a question about subsumed class payments. And before answering, I want to explain what that means. You can get a full-scale analysis from the book that Steve Resnick and I wrote many years ago called Knowledge and Class, which explains how this kind of class analysis works. The book is still available, Knowledge and Class, a Marxian critique of political economy. So here's what a subsumed class payment is about. In Marxian analysis, the workers who make the goods and services that corporations and companies sell have a peculiar relationship to the employers. Basically, it goes like this. The employer hires the workers who produce goods and services, who literally make the chairs out of wood and glue, or make the software programs using equipment like computers and paper and desks and offices and so forth. The employer hires the worker and pays the worker a sum of money, X dollars, let's call it. But the only reason that the employer does that is because that worker to whom the employer pays X dollars adds more to the value of what that employer sells than X dollars. Let's call it X plus S. In simple English, employers pay workers less than what employees give to the employer when they work. When you work, you add value. It's called value added to whatever you work on and to whatever you work with. You use tools and equipment, plus your brains and muscles, to transform inputs into outputs. And when you do that, the outputs have more value than the inputs, because what's been added to the value of the inputs is your labor, which adds value. But you don't get that extra. What you get is a wage, and that wage is less than the value you add when you work. And the difference between what the employer pays you to do the work and the value added when you work is the employer's surplus. Surplus. Key idea in Marxian theory, and it has to do with the relationship between the employer and one part of the employees, namely the people that literally make the goods and services. But of course, that's not the only employees that exist in any capitalist enterprises. There are employees that don't transform inputs into output. Let me give you some example. Suppose there's a security guard at a workplace. That security guard does not, let's say it's a ladder manufacturer. That security guard does not turn wood and glue and hammers and saws into ladders. What Marx called the productive laborers, they do that. The security guard provides a condition to allow the productive workers to do their job, because those productive workers couldn't do it, couldn't make the ladders if there wasn't a security guard to make sure that the machines they need and the raw materials they need are there in the morning when they arrive for work. Well, then how does the employer pay the security guard? Simple example. The employer does, he takes a portion of the surplus that he gets from his productive workers, the difference between the value they add and the value paid to them in their wages and salaries. The employer takes a piece of that difference, that surplus, and pays it to the security guard, because he's got to have that security guard there, so a part of the surplus is used for that purpose. That part is called a subsumed class payment. It is a payment out of the surplus by the employer after he has gotten that surplus out of the productive worker. It's not that complicated if you think about it. And like the security guard, there are all kinds of other people. For example, lawyers on retainer in case someone falls down the ladder and sues the company. The lawyer never dirties his or her hands making ladders, but you need them in order to stay in business because people may sue you. You also need managers. For example, the managers who go out and buy the raw wood and the glue and the machines. They don't make ladders. They are not productive laborers. But what they do is necessary, and so a portion of the surplus gotten from the productive worker is distributed to the lawyer, to the manager, to the security guard. These are the types of expenditures, but they're never the exhaustive whole of the surplus. Part of the surplus is also used by the employer, the capitalist, to give himself a profit, to have extra more money to throw into production or to use for whatever he wants than he had at the beginning of the process. Part of the surplus produced by productive laborers is taken as profit of the enterprise. Other parts are distributed to people who provide conditions for this surplus to be generated over and over again. I hope this has been a response to Brian Pittsey's good question, and I hope for others it may be an incentive to read up on Marxian class analysis. It explains a great deal, and you probably didn't get it in the schools you attended, so go to the literature that has it. It'll make you sharper in understanding what's going on.